Hey everyone, welcome to Data Umbrella's webinar. I'm going to do a quick introduction, then I'm going to hand the mic over to Rami. And during the presentation, you can put any questions in the chat or the Q&A tab. For this one, we also have a poll. So if you just want to click on the poll tab and complete that poll, that will really be helpful for Rami to understand who the audience is. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our Data Umbrella YouTube within a day, and I am going to post the link to that in the chat after I finish my presentation. We are an inclusive community for underrepresented persons in data science, and we are volunteer-run. A little bit about me. I'm a statistician. I've got my degree in stats and an MBA, and I can be found on Twitter, LinkedIn, and GitHub at Reshama S. We have a code of conduct, and we thank you for making this a welcoming, friendly community for all that people want to keep coming back to. There are a number of ways to support us. The first and foremost is to follow our code of conduct. The second is you can join Discord. The link to Discord is on our website, and ask any questions there and answer any questions. We have an open collective, so you can donate if you'd like. We have a bunch of playlists on YouTube. One of them is contributing to open source, and we've done a series of open source contributions for, say, NumPy, scikit-learn, CorePython, Pandas, so check that out. We also have 4 videos on career advice in data science, so feel free to check those out as well. And this is just a sampling of some of the events that we have had in the past year and a half. We also have a job board, so feel free to check it out and post any jobs if your company is hiring. And if you're looking, feel free to check it out. Our website has a number of resources on contributing to open source, guides to using inclusive language, accessibility and responsibility, AI ethics. Check it out. We are on all social media platforms as Data Umbrella. The most popular ones are Twitter and LinkedIn. Meetup is the best place to find out about upcoming events. That's where we post them. And I mentioned YouTube. I'm going to share the link to that so you can subscribe to the YouTube. And we also have a newsletter which goes out every 3 months. So I'll share the link to that as well. We have some upcoming events. Andreas Mueller, who is the core contributor to scikit-learn, is going to be doing a presentation on taking the edge off of data science with Dabble, which is a new library that he has started. On October 20th, Marietta Wijaya, who is actually the first women core contributor to CorePython, will be presenting on unit testing and continuous integration. And today's talk is the COVID-19 R dashboard in production with Rami Krispin. Rami is a data science manager who focuses mainly on time series analysis and forecasting applications. He's the author of the book Hands-on Time Series Analysis with R, as well as several R packages. And since the beginning of COVID-19 outbreak, he's been contributing to open source projects, creating several packages and building automated dashboards for tracking the outbreak. And this is why I imagine many of you are here to find out more about that. You can find Rami on LinkedIn, Twitter, and GitHub with these links, and these slides are downloadable. Just a reminder that we have a poll in the polls tab, so if you just want to click on that, that'd be great. And now I am going to hand the mic over to Rami.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you everyone that joined today. Let me just start to share my screen. And then we can kick it off. So I cannot, while I'm speaking, I cannot see the sharing. So could you please tell me if you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, so I'm working now with one screen. So if anything doesn't work, just let me know. I cannot see the chat. So thank you everyone joining today. So the topic is about how to put a dashboard or any type of product in production with open source tools and or free tools such as Docker and GitHub Action. We're going to focus today the example of the COVID-19 tracker for Italy, but generally, the intention is like you can do it with any other topic. So just a little bit about myself. I think the introduction before is kind of like summarize who I am. I'm a data science manager. I'm really into R and open source contributions. I'm focusing mainly on time series analysis in R. And I think that I would consider myself as a mediocre DevOps or data engineers. And I think the context of what I'm going to talk today about production is coming from that angle. As a full stack data scientist that also have some knowledge on DevOps, but I'm not a DevOps, so that's kind of like the context. So the agenda today, we start about talking, define what is a production, talk about a little bit about the tools, the architect, and then we leave some time for Q&A. Also, if there are any questions during the presentation, please leave it in the chat. So we post a survey about some of the tools that I'm going to talk about. So maybe I can just jump to the survey and see to the poll over here. So it seems like a third of people familiar with RMarkdown, and more or less the same RMarkdown, probably the same population. Less familiar with Docker and GitHub Action and GitHub Pages. So I think it's a great opportunity to introduce Docker or to give you the motivation why to use Docker, GitHub Action, and GitHub Page. I would say that I'm using here R as just as example, but you can apply anything that I'm going to talk in the context of R with Python or any other language. And I will provide more context about RMarkdown in a second. So with that, let's define what is production, because I think it's important. From a data science perspective, a production is, from my perspective also, automation of a repeated actions like data pipeline. When you need to refresh you have a data sets that refresh on some cadence, hourly, daily, weekly, or monthly, and you want to automate the process of collecting the data. So you're creating a data pipeline. Modeling, if you have some live data that you want to keep monitor and model, like anomaly detection, forecast, classification, or some dashboard with some data visualization. So all those things that they're live and you want to keep refresh them and you want to do it in automation. So that's one reason to put it in production. Use the tools that enable you to automate those and save you the time. The other thing that I can see when I think about production is robust code, meaning that you are adding some unit tests and some tools that it will be easy to debug. And the code level expected in a production level should be a bit more robust than just when you're writing some testing or developing. Then again, it's related to the first. When I say robust, it should be also functional programming. It's much more easy to handle and share with other people that work with you. Last but not least, reproducibility. And in that context, this is the context of why I strongly advocate to use tools such as Docker. that it sets your environment. So think about when you're developing some dashboard and you're developing in your local environment, and you want to make sure when you put it in production in some server or AWS or any tools that you're using, that the environment that you're using is the same environment that you develop. So anything that you, if it's worked on your, and test it and you work on your local environment, it should also run fluently on the production environment. So it's important. This is kind of like the motivation why you should use Docker. And this is kind of like a motivation. This is what the example I'm going to show today. The tracker for the COVID-19 cases. I started to track it when Italy, at the beginning of the pandemic, after the pandemic started to spread outside of China, Italy was the first one to get it seriously. And I was trying to get the data and to put it in some format. And I realized that you can do it with GitHub Action and GitHub Pages and using Flex dashboard. So maybe I can go out and show you the dashboard before. So this is the dashboard. It's live. It's deployed on GitHub Pages. It's based on Flex dashboard, which is a branch of RMarkdown. Essentially, RMarkdown enable you to write documentation, and there are several formats. One of them is this type of dashboard that you can customize. The other one is books, documents, and it's a whole ecosystem that enable you to do great stuff. So in this case, I'm using the Flex dashboard. I customize the views, the plots. I'm using Plotly, and the data get updated on a daily basis. So the motivation here is like to put in production. You want the data, there's going to be some data stream. It will, whenever the data on the raw data is get updated, you will pull it, render it, and display it, make it available on the web. You have different views here. Let's see. So the map is not aligned, but you have a view of the map. I need to refresh it, and you have other. Yeah, so you can see like the spread by the region and other statistics about the pandemic. So that's the dashboard. I think the interesting stuff is how to deploy it, less about the data. Once you understand how to do it, it's straightforward to create other stuff. And I think when go back here. So the way that I got to develop this tool, it started, and I provided a little bit the context before we started to Reshama, but maybe I should repeat it again. So when the pandemic started sometimes in February 2020, I decided to start to track the data. And in R, it's very common to put data in a library and make it available so anybody can go and access it. I know it's not as common in other languages, but it's very common in R. So I just decided to package it and make it a tidy format of the data and make it available. And as I started to work on it, the data got refreshed every day. And I think that was kind of like a difference, because typically when you package your data, you refresh it once every few months, or you just put it there and stay there. And there was a need to refresh the data on a daily basis. So then I was starting to look for another tools. And in the beginning, it was a manual effort, and then it got expanded to other packages or other countries like Italy, Switzerland, San Francisco. And there was a whole community now that started to develop packages to get a tidy data, a clean data from a variety of sources. And it was very challenging with the normal structure of our packages to get the data refresh live. And then I got, I think it's at the same time GitHub released the GitHub Action. So I was trying to understand how can I use it and leverage it. And I was trying to automate the data refresh with that. And it was a whole process of learning how to build environment. And at a certain point, I added the Docker component, which kind of like was make the process smoother and easy to refresh. But those tools are essential to go to production in this type of work frame. And at a certain point, I realized since you can deploy RMarkdown on GitHub pages, and an example of it's packaged down, which is kind of like the common documentation for libraries in R, which deploy on top of GitHub pages. If you can do it, essentially you can also deploy dashboards with the use of GitHub pages, because at the end of the day, it's Markdown. It's interactive. It's you can add visualization, but at the end of the day, it's just a Markdown. It doesn't require a server or something complex. So therefore, GitHub Pages is was a great place to deploy this type of format. And understanding that if you can deploy RMarkdown on a GitHub Pages, so you can actually also deploy dashboard with Flex Dashboard because it's the same. And that was the first dashboard, which is tracking worldwide COVID cases. And with that, the appetite started to increase. And during the last year wildfire in the US, I created another dashboard that just provide information about where there is fires. And this is a more complex. This dashboard is pulling data from API and then refresh the data, create a map. And this is a project that I'm now working on. It's a work in progress that it's example. I wanted to show example that you can actually also take a more complex stuff like applying machine learning models and deploy it in GitHub Action. So it's not limited just to a dashboard or visualization. You can also run machine learning models with GitHub Action under the limitation. It's open. It's a free tool. So obviously you are limited of how much CPU or power that you are getting. I wouldn't train a neural network there, but if you have a pre-trained model and you want to refresh it, like in this example, every 3 days, it's suitable to do it. In this case, it's running model from the GLMNet model from the H2O package. So with that, let's jump to and talk about the tools. So the idea here is, and that's what was the main motivation, is to use open source or free tools. And I think this is what is great about being open source contributor, that you are both learning new stuff and can apply it on your work. And in this case, you can apply what you learn from your work on your open source work. So Docker is something I've been using for a while, but I never thought about using it in the context of open source project. And it was a great use case how it can leverage such a tool to make your personal project as a much more robust. So if I need to summarize what is Docker, Docker enable you to create environment, it's not a virtual environment, but it's similar to virtual environment that you can deploy, you can build on your local machine with a Docker, inside a Docker in a virtual environment, and then you can deploy your product on any other environment using the same Docker. So essentially, what is ensured that if you test it on your local environment, it should work on any other environment that you are deploying with the same Docker. So if I need to give the example, if you see this, I don't know if you can see my camera, but I'm holding a Raspberry Pi, which is a type of a Linux box. Essentially, what I'm doing, I'm making an environment, I'm building a Linux box, and I'm sending the same box to the production. So it's running on the same environment and ensure that if it worked on my testing environment, it should work also on the production environment. And that this is save a lot of time and painful debugging when you're working this workflow. The other tool that I'm using, and it's playing a critical role here, is GitHub Action. GitHub Action is a scheduler. I think the simple way to describe it is a scheduler. If you want to schedule some work, a cron job, it enables you to say, I want to run this job on that cadence every hour, every day, or you can define the cadence. And it's give you a machine. It could be either a Windows-based machine, Mac OS, or Linux. And you can just run something on this machine. Run it. You have a code, you execute the code, and you run it. So this is just the machine. And you are loading the Docker, which environment, and then you can run the code, which is based on Bash, and R. And it's rendering, it's pulling the data, deploy it on Flex dashboard, render it on Flex dashboard and Plotly, and then deploy it on GitHub Pages. GitHub Pages is another tool that enable you to, the intention of this tool is when you open a project that you can put your documentation. So essentially, any HTML file that you have, you can deploy it and you can run it. And the Flex dashboard, what it does, it's render the dashboard into HTML static file. So from there, you can email it or you can deploy it on some web, in this case, GitHub Pages. It's as simple as it is. I will pause there before I go to talk about Architect and see if there are any questions.
Yes, there's a couple of questions. The first is, does Docker work across operating systems such as Linux to Windows?
So you can run Docker on Mac OS, Windows, and obviously Linux is native on Linux. I'm not sure about other operating systems, but I think there is just a small caveat on Windows because it's working differently. I'm using Mac OS and it's worked fluently.
Okay, and there's another question. Would the use of Docker help ensure that the package versions stay the same within test and production environments?
That's a great question. So essentially, what you're getting in the Docker, you can either use a customized Docker that someone built already with the installed packages, or you can build your own Docker. I typically enjoy building my own Dockers. It's from learning perspective, I think it's if you want to learn Docker, you need to build your own Docker. And then I also want to control the packages that I'm installing. So this is the reason that I'm building my own Dockers. And you can install a specific package. And that's the unique thing about Docker. You can set a Docker with, let's say that you want dplyr version 1.1.0.5 and you want Plotly, a specific version of Plotly. So you can define, there are multiple ways that you can do it. You can use mrun, which is a snapshot of screen, or you can use the remote package and say, I want a specific package, and then it enables you to install from archive or the latest. So that's what is great about it, because you're setting environment and you make sure that when you deploy it, you're using the exact same packages, the exact same OS that you test with on the production.
Another question is, how to deploy similar dashboards as internal service within company because the data cannot sit on a public domain? So
internal companies, each company probably has its own method. Like I would say that the GitHub Action is also available on the enterprise version. And typically, there are, in the R world, you can install RStudio Connect and build your own server with the then it will give you all the authentication and VPN protection and everything that you need. I'm less familiar with the deployment, the cybersecurity of how to make it secure. All those examples here are very open source, and it definitely you should not put anything that is sensitive. I'm not sure if I answered this question correctly.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I haven't personally used it, but isn't there the RStudio Enterprise server for companies? I would think that would address that.
You have RStudio Connect, which is a great tool. It enables you to connect to so typically each company has its own security layer. So it enables to connect to the company security and authentication layer and make it protected. So it's enterprise ready. What I'm showing here, it's not enterprise solution. It is open source, and you can make it protected, but it will require additional effort.
And one last question before you go on is, would the use of, I think maybe you answered this already, would the use of Docker help ensure packages versions stay sane within test and production? I think you answered that.
Yes, and I would add to this that typically I'm creating two types of Dockers. One is dev for the development, and one is for prod. Because once I'm finishing to develop the Docker and testing, I tag it as a prod, and then I can continue to the development if I'm adding new features without, because you keep changing the Docker, so you don't want to test stuff and affect the production. So that's why I'm doing also separation. I have a dev Docker and a pro Docker that enable me to continue to develop while the dashboard is in production.
So actually, I read the wrong question twice. There's just one more. So we cannot run Shiny through GitHub, hence why we use Flex Dashboard? Yes,
because to run Shiny, you need, so Shiny, for those who are not familiar, it's enable you to build interactive dashboard that require on the backend a server. GitHub Action does not provide a server. Just GitHub Pages enable you to deploy a static HTML file, and Flex Dashboard, that's what it does. It's render it into HTML file and does not require a server to run it. You can add Shiny to Flex Dashboard, but then this won't work on GitHub Pages, because then you need a server. But Shiny is a great tool that if you need to make it a dynamic dashboard, so that's the tool that I would use. But then it requires a different resource, and typically server, it's something that it's hard to find for free. If you find for free, it's like you get some limitation of number of hours that you can share it.
Great, no more questions here.
Okay, so let's dive into the architect of this, more details. So the first thing that you need is the GitHub action. This is the scheduler. It's trigger the work and provide the resources, the Linux box that you want to run, or the Mac OS, or the Windows server. So once you trigger it, you can either build your environment from scratch. So think about, like, if you're asking for Linux, it's coming as a clean Linux box, and you need to install all the dependencies. So in order to avoid it, I'm using Docker. This is what Docker is about, is save you the time to install all dependencies, make sure that you're using the same dependency as in your development. The next steps is I'm using Bash as a code orchestrate, because you essentially are working on some type of command line. Like you cannot run multiple script, or you can, but it's a bit more convoluted in a YAML file. So Bash is a command line script language that enable you to run a full script as opposed to command line by line. So with Bash, I'm using to trigger out code, and this is the main driver. I'm using R to pull the data. In this case, I'm pulling it from the coronavirus and the COVID-19 Italy packages, and then it render it with the RMarkdown to a Flex dashboard, and use Plotly as a interactive visualization. And once it render it into HTML file, deploy it in a GitHub pages. So that's it. It's a very simple process. I think that most R users will find the R component straightforward. I think it's like if you understand how to work with the GitHub action and build the Docker, it's become a very, the sky is the limit, like what you can do. And this is example. This is the YAML file that I'm using on GitHub action. This is where I'm defining the job, and it's 18 lines of code. That's it. That's the whole story. And it started with defining the schedule. So if you are familiar with cron jobs, it's using those stars to define how often you want to run the job. The first digit is defining the minutes. The second digit is defining the hours, days, months, and so on. So in this case, I'm saying run the job every 8 hours at the beginning of the hour. And so every 8 hours, it's trigger this job, and then it's allocate me Ubuntu 18.05. It's the previous version. I think there is a 20 point something. It's the new version. But this is the same version I'm using in the Docker. So I'm aligning my OS version to the one I'm using in the Docker. And essentially, it's give me a Linux box with Ubuntu as OS. And once I get this box, I'm mounting the Docker with the environment. And this is the example of the Docker file I'm using here. I am pulling another Docker that I created with the installed version, R version 4. I'm adding some dependencies. I'm installing the required packages. So I'm running some R script. And then I'm creating the image. So once I'm setting the environment, the next steps is to check in from the master branch, the code. I'm using the bash script, and this is you see on the right side, to trigger the RMarkdown to render the whole code. So it's pulling the data and rendering it. And then if there is any changes in the dashboard, it will commit it and push it. So essentially, this is the whole process. I will pause here if there are any question on this before we'll go to the repo and I can go in more details.
Somebody asks, what are the best resources to learn about YAML and GitHub Actions?
So can maybe okay. So I have a resource on the end of the presentation, and I will share it. But you have GitHub has a great documentation. I would start with the main documentation of that they're providing. In the context of R, there are also, if you Google, you will find, I can share it also, people that did some stuff with GitHub Action. The only thing that I would caveat about in the context of R is there is two approaches. One is to install the environment anytime that you are running an action. So you are using a built-in environment that it's called rlib, which kind of like you can ask for a specific version, but then you will have to install the packages, and this is I saw that's how I started, and it was not as stable. So I highly recommend to go to start with Docker. At the beginning, go straight to Docker, learn Docker. It's much more stable. And if you see here, I'm presenting. This is a typical R project, and when you are adding action, so action is available over here. You can see it in any repo that you will open. That you can see that you have this tab, and if you go here, it gives you the work that ran. So it see that since I deployed it more than a year ago, there was 1,326 jobs that ran, and you can go and check. So it see that you have the check mark, the green check mark, mean that it was ran successfully. Maybe I can see if there are failures somewhere. So you see here, this is how you can see that the job failed, and you can go and open it and see why it failed. Maybe it's not available anymore, but essentially, you can go and see the code that ran, and you see all the steps. So it's start by set up the environment. So this is initialized containers. It's pulling the Docker container. That's interesting. Pulling the branch, and then render the RMarkdown. So here it's R code running. So if people familiar with R, this is how RMarkdown is rendering. It's render all the chunks, and then at the end, it's committed. And there are more complex. You can do much more complex work. So, for example, in the context of, I can check another example. If you are package developer and you want to have a unit test anytime that you commit, so you can see that you can set. By the way, you can set multiple actions, so it's not limited to one. You just add another YAML file, and here I'm running anytime that I'm pushing or there is a pull request, I'm running unit test to make sure that the push or the pull request is properly not triggering some errors. And about YAML file, I can find a resource, and it should be very straightforward to learn YAML file. Sometimes it's something that I should admit that I learned on the fly, so I might miss some of the parts that I should learn, but it's straightforward. It's just a manifest. There is some kind of like a hierarchy in the way that you indent the code, and it's just manifest, and the manifest it's based on the application that you are building. So it's essentially like the way that you think about YAML file is like JSON file. It's just some hierarchy. So if it was JSON, so that was kind of like you can see the hierarchy by the indenting of the code.
Another question is, what does I believe in this main.yaml file, what does checkout_repo refer to?
Checkout repo?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so it's just saying, so think about here, I'm in this this is a repo. Checkout repo is mean that as you install the existing repo, and you can say instead of master, check out the dev. So maybe I can show a more complex. So it's over here, example. So here, this is the way that I'm testing this is my development workflow. So I have a dev branch, I have staging branch, and I have the master, which kind of like you can call it the production. And typically here, if I'm changing the Docker, you will see here that this should be a dev Docker. I just finished tested, so I'm using the prod, but the next iteration when I will test the new Docker, so you see that on the dev branch, I want to test the dev Docker. So essentially, it enables you to test different features on the different branches. So if you want to separate between your production and your development or testing environment or staging, it enables you to check out different branches. So here I have in jobs, I have three jobs. One is the dev, the other one is the staging, and the last one is the production or the default master branch.
So the question is, can we replace R with Python here?
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest, it probably would be easier to do it with Python. Essentially, if you can see, I am not running here R code, I'm running bash that's calling R code. But you can, on the run, so you should think about that the run command, you are on the command line. So anything that will run on the command line inside your Docker would be applicable to run here. So you could replace the bash with Python and some Python script. And I think if you go to action, so let me try to do it actually. There is, so if you go to new workflow, it's give me R because I'm using R in this, but you have a whole, it's called like a GitHub shop or GitHub, I forgot how they call it, but you can see like a built-in customization of actions for different systems. In here, you can see like AWS, Red Hat, Kubernetes. Here, there are a lot of Pythons. Probably there are more Pythons than anything else because this is one of the most common languages. So I would, definitely you have more options with Python. R is just a tool that I'm using here because in this context, it's building the dashboard and all things, enable you to do all the process from the data, putting the data until creating the HTML file inside R. But definitely you can do it with any language that can run on the command line.
Another question is, so essentially the bash script job is to do the git push action to refresh the dashboard interface.
Yeah, so I think, it's just, if you are used to work on the command line, or if you're familiar with the command line, I'm trying to go back to the, if you need to run multiple steps, if you need to do it in the command line, so you need to create those multiple scripts of name and run. So in order to make it in one step, I just running a bash script that trigger all the function I want to run in that build, and we can go and see. So here, this is like you can see I'm running just one R script, but it's multiple commands. I could do it, copy this into the action and run it as is, but I think it's much more easy to maintain when it is in that format, in a bash script. So I think it's like so if I need to maybe to define it in a easy way to understand, it's like if you are on your RStudio or in some, in your Python IDE, you can write code directly on the console, or you can have a code inside a script file. So that's enable you to, instead of running a code line by line on the script file, you just run one bash file with one script. It's just a shortcut, but you can do both, because essentially bash is running using the same language as you would use in the command line.
Okay, no more questions.
So essentially, that's what I had to present. I can go over. So the resources available here. You have a link to the dashboard. You have a link to the source code. If you want to reproduce it, if you are using R, so it will be straightforward. You can just fork it, and then just play. Change the setting to. You can build your own. If you have already some R Flex dashboard or any RMarkdown, you can just change the code that will run your RMarkdown. And when I built the first dashboard for the general COVID tracker, I think dozens of people just clone it and create their own, for the specific countries or their specific use case. And it was really nice to see how people are leveraging the code and creating their own version. In some cases, I was very impressed what people did. So I think that I'm happy that I can help other people to unlock the production side and communicate what they're doing. Docker. So one thing about Docker. So Docker announced in the beginning of the month that it's now you need to have subscription, but it's only for enterprise. So it's still free tool for if you are not using it for enterprise. If you're using it for personal project, it's still free. This is link for what I showed before to GitHub Action, and this is the link for GitHub Pages. I highly recommend to use those tools. They are free. It's easy to understand. It might require some, depending on from the level you're starting, some learning. But once you understand, you can really do really cool stuff. So that's all I have to present today. I'm happy there are more questions if you want to dive more into the code. Happy to do it.
So there's a question here. The workflow seems complex. Any guidance on how to set it up step by step, and more on why and how you chose these range of tools and services to get this workflow working?
Yeah. So it was kind of like I learned it on by doing it, and eventually convert to this workflow that was I found much more efficient and convenient. I would say that if you simplify it, it seems overwhelming if you are not used R, but essentially what you need to do is to the Docker to set the environment, and I think maybe take one step back. You need to have idea of what you want to do. If you think about dashboard, if you want to refresh it or in a certain cadence, you need to think about the scheduler. Once you realize what you want to do and you have a file that run the script and create it, the only thing that you need left to do is to link it with the scheduler. And for that, you need the environment. So it may sound overwhelming when it's the first time that you hear about it. But if you have, I think the only to be honest, the only thing that is require more effort is the R component, if you're not familiar with R. But then like you can do it with Python, or you can do it with Julia or any other programming language that you can think about, that you feel comfortable. The only thing that you will need is the environment, and you can skip the bash. You can do it directly. I just use it for convenience. But essentially, if you can see, that's all you need. You need to have a scheduler. You set like a kind of like a cron job, the environment, and there are other tools beside Docker, but I found it is simple. And then a file to run. So usually when I want to learn something, I just fork a repository and start to play and break it until I'm doing some kind of reverse engineering. The other, if you're much more thorough and you have the time, is just go start learn Docker. And once you learn Docker and you're familiar with some command line, I feel it's much more intuitive and understandable, like how to run this workflow.
So this is a question for me, actually. So ideally, what I could do is I could take the repo that you created and fork it, right?
Yeah.
I would, I guess I would need to have R installed on my computer, or would I use RStudio to run it, or the code?
So if you want, you can take it as is and deploy it. You don't need to run it locally. You can. So maybe you can go back to let's go to the COVID, the Italy tracker. So if you want to run it locally, you can actually, so what I'm doing for any project I'm building is I'm creating a Docker folder that you can actually, you don't even need to, no, actually you need to fork it, but essentially you can run the whole environment by typing this, and you get the same environment that I'm using. It's essentially will spin, it will spin RStudio inside a Docker. So maybe I can try to do it really quickly. So this is my environment. This is how I develop. I'm writing now a new version for the coronavirus package, and I'm doing it inside a Docker. So what I'm doing now by typing this, I'm sorry, it might be, seems like maybe I should, the font make it bigger. So what I'm saying, ignore some of the stuff here, but what I'm saying, I expose the Docker on port 8787, and I want to have it on my local machine on 8787. It's exposed on the Docker itself on 8787. You can change the port, but essentially you set the port that you want to have the instance available. This is where my local folder. So once you fork it, you just give the path. This is inside the Docker, and you can have your own setting, but if you don't need to have those 3 lines. And this is the Docker that I want to pull from. So if you don't have it installed, what it will do, it will pull it from Docker Hub. So if I'm running it now.
So yeah, actually a good reminder is the first time you run it, it's going to take a while, right? Because
yes,
you built the Docker container, so don't be surprised. But then once you've built it and you run it again, it'll take less time.
Exactly. So now if I go localhost 8787, you are in the same environment. You are now having RStudio. You're running version 4.1. Anyone can do it now if they run it, if they have Docker installed and they run it. Now we are all using the same environment that I'm using. And you see now I mount my package from my local machine. And now I can open the project. So the reason that I'm doing it, because when I'm running the unit test in GitHub Action, sometimes I get errors that I'm not getting in my local machine. When I'm working here, I can ensure that whenever I'm doing check, it will be the same check that it will run on the build on GitHub Action, because I'm using the same environment. Now I'm running inside my Docker. And if I will load the package, like let's say, so you see, that's the dplyr version that I'm using in the Docker, and this is the one that will be used inside the production environment. So, and now you see I got error. I can go and see why there is the error and debug it. And then it's, you can change the branch. And now I'm on my dev. I can go to my other branches, and I think it's the perfect development environment, because it's exactly the same environment. I'm not running it in my local machine. I'm running it virtually on my local machine, and it's now I'm using macOS, but it's running inside a Linux box, a virtual Linux box.
So another question here is, does GitHub Pages require any web framework like Flask?
No. What it mainly required, so if I'm going here, you need to have a docs folder, and you need to have some file. Typically, you define it as index.html, and that's it. So if you go to setting, and you go to pages, I think it's pages. Yeah, so you see, you can define which branch you want to use and the folder, and typically by default it will be docs. Once you set it and there is some index.html file, you will see that you get a web address, like the site address, and you can just go and open it.
So I have a question. Conceivably, I could fork your repo, go through the steps, and let's just say you have COVID-19 for Italy, but if I wanted to do, say, India, I could change that line of code that picks up the country India in the data and get it all going. Is that right?
Technically, yes, but I will caveat here that it was not built that you can change it to another country, because it's pulling specific data from COVID-19 Italy. So assuming that you have a COVID-19 India package with the same format, so yes. Now, like the example I'm now building for the electricity forecast, it's actually, I'm building it in a JSON format that you can have a setting file that you can actually go. So I'm using API from EIA that I'm putting the data. They can say, I'm now I want only electricity for California. So you just change the code on the API, and essentially it will do the rest. That's what I'm working now to get to this level.
So I think I've been used to using the Johns Hopkins database, but because you're doing it by country, maybe the sources that you use are a bit more up to date before they make it to the Johns Hopkins database update.
So I'm using both the Johns Hopkins with the coronavirus package, but also using a specific package that I built for Italy. So that has more granular data. You can see the province and the region level, which is not available on Johns Hopkins. So that's kind of like specific for Italy, but like technically you can build it in the first place, that you can, it's modular, that you can, if you have different regions or you have different countries, yes, definitely you can do it. In this case specifically, it might not work because I build it, Italy, the data that Italy provide is different from other countries because they have a province and region, and the format that they're using, the columns, it's unique. But in other case, yes, if you if you build it in the first place to be modular that you can switch the country, so definitely. And that's what people did with my COVID tracker, like the coronavirus dashboard, which was the first one. They just changed just some of the filtering and they made it country level.
Another question is, so we never use our local machine in production when using Docker?
So yes, because you are deploying in some server, essentially, right? You need to have some, in this case, it's GitHub Action. It's running in a virtual machine on GitHub Action. So what Docker does, it just sets the same environment that you use to develop. So the handoff to GitHub Action is smooth. They use the exact same environment that you develop. The other, before that, in the past, what happened that you had the DevOps, you have the development team, and you have the deployment team, and they develop some product, and they send them the code, and then the code is not working because they might use, they develop with macOS, but they deploy it on Linux or Windows, and then the whole mess started. Like they need to debug why it ran on one machine and it's not running on the other machine. This is why Docker is great, because it avoids this complexity of the different versioning. You are exactly use the same machine.
So a related question is, where is the Docker running? We don't need a server for this dashboard service, is that right?
Yeah, so the Docker, once you create a Docker, you can push it to Docker Hub, which is equivalent to GitHub, but it's just hosting Dockers. And then you can call it. So when you say container equal to, and you give the name of the container, assuming the container is available on GitHub Hub, it will pull it from there and just use it as the environment.
Another question here is, I think for changing country, we need that package to run and change some code.
Yes, you essentially have to modify a bit the code. I mean, you can do it essentially, but you technically, if you just change RMarkdown and you can pull, for example, from the coronavirus, which has all the countries, but it's country level, doesn't have the province. The difference is that it doesn't have the province and some sub-region that Italy does published.
This seems really fascinating because conceivably what we could do is we could, in the beginning where the data is being sort of set up, is to set up the country database according to, let's just say, the way the Italy was set up. And then once that data is set up, then it could go through the entire script line and use that. Like that's one area where the adjustment could be made, or changing the code and changing the data. This is sort of like, it's really, it's like so powerful. It's almost like if countries could sort of set up their data, if they had that, then they could, use your code to just get it going, right?
Yeah, I know. Individual did it, like they just modify a bit the RMarkdown or the source that they use, as long as you can point to where you're pulling the CSV file or the API and render the RMarkdown. The environment is there. As long as you're using the same packages, you can just change it and it will run. You are on mute.
Sorry, so it's 1:04 our time, which is 10:04 your time. I know you said you had a meeting to go to, right?
Yeah, I need to, unfortunately, I need to drop.
Okay, all right, great. What I will do is I will, so this is being recorded. I'm going to upload it to YouTube, and I'll probably send a notice to the email list on Meetup, and then I'll also share it with Rami, so you can share it with your network when it's available. And I'm looking forward to going through it, and just even like getting it working would be great. I have a little bit of experience with Docker, but it's funny, deployment is really what so many people are interested in, because it's not something that they typically, like data scientists have information on. So I think that's why it was, of such interest.
Yeah, once you unlock this Docker, it's unbelievable what you can do. It's really, I highly recommend people go and Docker. It's more easy than it sounds.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sort of putting together this presentation. And yeah, I think people are going to enjoy watching it later as well. Thank you.
Thank you, my pleasure. Thank you for the invite, and thank you everybody that joined today.